Some heroes never wear medals, and some are never even invited to stand among them. The autumn wind drifted gently through Arlington National Cemetery, carrying the scent of fresh grass, white roses, and rain-soaked stone across the quiet hillside. Hundreds of visitors stood shoulder to shoulder beneath a pale gray sky, their voices lowered to respectful whispers as the annual memorial ceremony prepared to begin. American flags moved softly above rows of white headstones that stretched farther than the eye could follow, each one carrying a name, a date, and a lifetime of sacrifice. At the center of the ceremonial field, 7 magnificent German Shepherd military working dogs stood perfectly aligned beside their handlers. Their sable coats shone beneath the muted morning light. Their ears remained upright. Their eyes never wandered. Every movement reflected years of discipline, patience, and trust. The audience watched them with admiration, cameras lowered out of respect for the solemn occasion. Several veterans quietly removed their caps. Children instinctively fell silent. Near the back of the gathering stood a woman almost no one noticed. Emily Carter, a 38-year-old white American nurse with light brown hair gathered neatly beneath a simple navy coat, held a small bouquet of white lilies against her chest. She wore no military insignia, no decorations, and nothing that distinguished her from the many visitors who had come simply to remember. Her blue eyes rested on the line of German shepherds with a warmth that seemed to come from memories far older than the ceremony itself. She did not step forward. She did not seek attention. She remained quietly where she believed she belonged, hoping only to pay her respects before leaving unnoticed. A volunteer in an event jacket approached with an apologetic smile. "Ma'am, I am sorry, but this section is reserved for invited guests and service personnel. Would you mind stepping outside the ceremony area?" His voice remained polite, but the words settled heavily in the cool morning air. Emily looked toward the memorial stage, then down at the flowers in her hands. For a brief moment, disappointment crossed her face before she answered with gentle understanding. "Of course, I did not realize." She thanked him with a quiet nod and slowly turned away. No one protested. No one recognized her name. To the crowd, she was simply another visitor leaving before the ceremony began. The gravel path crunched softly beneath her shoes as she walked toward the outer gate. Behind her, the master of ceremonies welcomed the audience. A bugler lifted his instrument. The 7 German shepherds remained motionless, every leash perfectly still. Then something changed. One dog slowly lifted its head higher than before. Its ears angled toward the departing woman. Another followed. Then another. Their handlers noticed the subtle movement, but assumed it was nothing more than curiosity. Emily never looked back. She continued walking, holding the white lilies a little closer as the morning breeze brushed across her face. She had spent years learning that quiet service rarely asked for recognition. She believed this day would be no different. She could not have known that 7 faithful hearts had already recognized the one face they would never forget. As Emily reached the stone pathway leading toward the outer gate, the quiet ceremony continued behind her as though nothing unusual had happened. A gentle breeze carried the sound of the bugle across the rolling hillside, mingling with the rustling leaves of ancient oak trees that had watched generations come and go. She slowed for only a moment, glancing down at the white lilies resting in her hands. A single raindrop slipped from one of the petals onto her sleeve. She smiled faintly, brushed it away, and kept walking. She had long ago accepted that many of the most meaningful moments in life passed unnoticed. Years earlier, she had learned the same lesson inside the military medical center where daylight rarely mattered. Long shifts blended into sleepless nights beneath bright hospital lights, where the steady rhythm of heart monitors replaced ordinary conversations, and every hallway carried the clean scent of antiseptic mixed with fresh coffee. Emily never considered herself extraordinary. She simply believed that every patient deserved to be treated with dignity, whether they walked through the doors on 2 legs or 4. The rehabilitation wing became her second home. There, recovering service members shared the same quiet determination as the military working dogs resting in specially designed recovery suites nearby. While surgeons repaired injuries and therapists rebuilt strength, Emily focused on something less visible. She spoke softly to frightened young soldiers who doubted they would ever return to normal life. She sat beside anxious handlers who refused to leave the kennels of their canine partners. Every morning before sunrise, she made one extra round through the veterinary section carrying fresh water, clean blankets, and patient hands that never rushed. The German Shepherd seemed to recognize her long before she entered each room. Tails tapped gently against kennel floors. Alert ears relaxed. Nervous breathing settled into calm silence. Some handlers laughed that the dogs trusted Nurse Carter almost as much as they trusted their own partners. Emily always answered with the same quiet smile. They already know who they are. I am only here to remind them they are safe. Among the many dogs who passed through the rehabilitation center, 7 remained unforgettable. Each arrived at different times. One refused food after weeks away from home. Another struggled to place weight on an injured paw. One older dog became restless whenever thunderstorms rolled across the base. Emily never forced them to heal faster than they were ready. She sat beside them with remarkable patience, reading medical charts aloud in a calm voice, brushing their coats, offering gentle reassurance, and celebrating every small step forward as though it were the greatest victory of the day. The handlers noticed something remarkable. Even the most disciplined German shepherds developed a special calm whenever Emily entered the room. She remembered every name, every favorite toy, every habit, and every milestone. Before each dog returned to active duty or retirement, she always knelt beside them, placed one hand gently beneath the collar, and whispered the same words. Go home safely. Someone will always be waiting for you. She never imagined those words would remain with them long after the hospital doors had closed. Back at the memorial, the 7 German shepherds still stood in perfect formation beneath the gray morning sky. Their handlers maintained steady posture as the opening remarks continued across the loudspeakers. Yet one by one, each dog quietly lifted its head toward the distant pathway where Emily had nearly disappeared beyond the trees, as though memories buried deep beneath years of discipline had awakened all at once. The ceremony continued with quiet precision. The master of ceremonies welcomed families, veterans, and honored guests while the notes of the bugle floated gently through the cool autumn air. Rows of American flags moved softly above the white headstones, and every visitor seemed to breathe a little more slowly beneath the weight of remembrance. Yet among the 7 German shepherds standing beside their handlers, something invisible had already changed. The first dog, an older sable male named Valor, lifted his nose into the breeze. His ears turned toward the gravel path where Emily had disappeared only moments before. One handler noticed the movement and gave the leash a gentle reminder. Valor immediately returned to perfect posture, but only for a heartbeat. Beside him, a younger female named Harper blinked once, then quietly shifted her attention in exactly the same direction. One after another, the remaining 5 dogs followed without a single command passing between them. It was not excitement. It was recognition. Years earlier, each of those dogs had entered the rehabilitation wing carrying a different burden. Some arrived exhausted after long deployments. Others struggled to trust unfamiliar hands while recovering from difficult assignments. Emily had never rushed any of them. She learned every personality with remarkable patience. Valor refused to eat during his first 2 days, so she simply sat outside his kennel reading aloud from a worn paperback novel until curiosity slowly replaced fear. Harper would only rest when someone quietly hummed the same old hymn each evening, and Emily remembered every note. Another German shepherd named Ranger became anxious whenever heavy rain struck the roof of the hospital. Emily stayed long after her shift ended, sitting beside him until the storm passed and calm returned. None of those moments appeared in official reports. There were no medals for brushing tangled coats, replacing worn blankets, or whispering gentle encouragement during long nights when frightened animals simply needed someone willing to remain beside them. Yet the handlers often noticed remarkable changes after Emily's visits. The dogs relaxed more quickly. Recovery progressed with renewed confidence. Their eyes seemed brighter. One senior trainer once smiled and quietly remarked, "They remember kindness longer than commands." Emily laughed softly at the time, believing he was only being polite. She never imagined those words would prove true years later. Back at the memorial, the opening prayer concluded, and the audience bowed their heads. The handlers remained perfectly still, expecting the dogs to mirror their discipline as they always had. Instead, Every German shepherd fixed its attention beyond the assembled crowd. Valor's tail moved once. Harper's ears lifted. Ranger inhaled deeply as though catching a familiar scent carried gently by the breeze. The handlers exchanged puzzled glances. These were highly trained military working dogs that had performed flawlessly through countless public ceremonies. Their synchronized attention toward someone no longer inside the gathering made no sense. Near the outer pathway, Emily paused beside a stone wall covered with climbing ivy. She carefully placed the white lilies beneath a small memorial plaque dedicated to military medical personnel whose quiet service often remained unseen. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, offering a silent prayer for friends she still remembered by name. Then she stood, adjusted her navy coat, and began walking toward the parking area without realizing that 7 faithful hearts behind her had already chosen the person they believed deserved to stand at the center of that morning's remembrance. Emily had nearly reached the parking area when the ceremony behind her entered its most solemn moment. The master of ceremonies invited everyone to observe a minute of silence. Hundreds of people lowered their heads together. The breeze settled. Even the leaves seemed to stop moving beneath the old trees. Along the front of the memorial, the 7 German shepherds remained standing beside their handlers with flawless discipline that had been refined through years of patient training. Then Valor quietly stepped forward. It was only a single pace, almost too small for anyone beyond the front row to notice, but his handler immediately felt the gentle pull on the leash. He gave the familiar command to remain in position. Valor obeyed for a heartbeat, yet his amber eyes never left the distant figure walking away beyond the stone pathway. Harper shifted next. Ranger followed. Within seconds, all 7 dogs stood with their bodies angled in the same direction, their attention fixed on someone no one else seemed to recognize. The handlers exchanged puzzled glances. These dogs had performed at national ceremonies, military funerals, and official commemorations without a single mistake. Their synchronized reaction made no sense. The audience slowly became aware that something unusual was unfolding. Several veterans looked toward the line of dogs instead of the memorial stage. A photographer lowered his camera, uncertain whether to continue documenting the ceremony or whatever was about to happen. One young boy quietly whispered to his father, asking why every dog was looking at the same woman. His father had no answer. Emily continued walking, unaware that dozens of curious eyes had turned toward her. She carried the bouquet carefully against her coat, believing she had already slipped quietly back into the ordinary world beyond the ceremony. She paused only once to look at the endless rows of white headstones stretching across the hillside before taking another slow step toward the parking lot. Behind her, the silence reached its final seconds. Then, almost as though they had shared the same unspoken thought, the first leash relaxed. Valor calmly walked out of formation. His handler called his name in surprise, but the German shepherd never hurried. He simply continued forward with quiet certainty. Harper followed immediately behind him. Ranger came next. Within moments, all 7 German shepherds had left their perfectly aligned positions and were walking together across the grass in the same direction. There was no panic, no barking, no confusion. Their movements were calm, measured, and purposeful, as though each step had already been decided long before that morning. Gasps spread softly through the gathering. The bugler lowered his instrument. The master of ceremonies stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Even the handlers, though startled, sensed something extraordinary in the dog's composed determination and chose not to force them back. Emily heard the faint sound of paws crossing the damp grass behind her. Thinking another visitor had approached with a family pet, she turned slowly. The bouquet nearly slipped from her hands as she saw 7 familiar German shepherds walking toward her beneath the gray autumn sky. For a long moment, she simply stood frozen. Then one quiet smile appeared, carrying years of memories that no one else standing there could yet understand. Emily remained motionless as the 7 German shepherds approached with the quiet confidence that only years of disciplined training could produce. None of them barked. None of them pulled wildly against their leashes. They simply walked together until they formed a gentle circle around her, each dog stopping as though they had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times before. Valor rested his head lightly against her hand. Harper sat beside her left shoulder, looking up with calm amber eyes that reflected complete trust. Ranger leaned forward just enough for Emily to recognize the small white patch beneath his collar that she remembered brushing every morning during his recovery. The bouquet of white lilies trembled slightly in her hands as memories rushed back all at once. She smiled through gathering tears and softly whispered each dog's name without hesitation. Valor, Harper, Ranger, Mason, Duke, Willow, Scout. Every handler froze where they stood. Several exchanged astonished glances. None of them had introduced the dogs. Some of these German shepherds had retired years earlier and served with entirely different units before arriving at the memorial. Yet Emily remembered every one of them exactly as though no time had passed. The silence across the cemetery became almost overwhelming. The master of ceremonies stepped away from the podium without speaking. Cameras lowered. No one wanted to interrupt whatever was unfolding before them. A senior canine trainer named Captain Robert Hayes slowly removed his gloves and stared at the remarkable scene. His expression shifted from confusion to recognition. "It cannot be," he murmured almost to himself. Then he walked forward with careful, respectful steps until he stood only a few feet from Emily. She looked up, surprised to recognize him as well. His hair had turned almost completely gray since they had worked together, but his warm smile had not changed. "Captain Hayes," she said quietly. He nodded, emotion filling his eyes. "I thought you had moved away years ago." Emily smiled gently. "I did. I only came today to remember some old friends." Captain Hayes looked around at the 7 German shepherds sitting peacefully around her. "They remembered you first." A soft murmur spread through the crowd as veterans began asking one another who the woman might be. One elderly Marine quietly answered, "If those dogs trust her like that, there is a story none of us knows." Captain Hayes turned toward the audience before speaking in a clear, steady voice. "Many people here recognize these remarkable military working dogs. Very few recognize the nurse who spent years helping them recover when everyone else had already gone home for the night." Emily immediately shook her head. "Please, this ceremony is not about me." Hayes smiled kindly. "That is exactly why it should be." He knelt beside Valor and gently stroked the older German shepherd's neck. There were nights when this dog refused food until she sat beside him. There were mornings when another one could only walk because she encouraged him one careful step at a time. She never asked for recognition. She never accepted public praise. She simply cared for every soldier who entered those hospital doors, whether they wore boots or paws. Around them, more veterans slowly removed their caps. Families stood quietly. Several handlers felt their own eyes fill with tears as the full meaning of the dog's extraordinary response became clear. Emily lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the unexpected attention, while the 7 faithful companions remained beside her, proving without a single spoken word that genuine kindness is remembered far longer than anyone ever expects. Captain Hayes stood quietly for a moment, allowing the silence to carry more meaning than any speech could have offered. The 7 German shepherds remained gathered around Emily with remarkable composure, their tails resting still against the grass, their attentive eyes never leaving the woman who had once cared for them without expecting anything in return. The audience watched in respectful silence, sensing that they were witnessing something far greater than an unexpected interruption. The ceremony had begun as a tribute to remembered service, yet it had become a living reminder that compassion leaves footprints no passage of time can erase. Emily lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable standing at the center of so much attention. "I only did my job," she said softly. Her voice barely carried beyond those standing closest to her. Captain Hayes smiled with quiet understanding. "No," he replied. "You did far more than your job. You reminded every wounded soul who entered that hospital that they still mattered." His words settled gently over the gathering. Several handlers nodded without realizing they were doing so. One younger handler stepped forward beside Harper and spoke with quiet emotion. She never met this dog until after her retirement ceremony. Harper was frightened of almost everyone during recovery. The only person she would willingly follow was Nurse Carter. Emily looked down at Harper, who responded by resting her head gently against Emily's coat. The simple gesture drew warm smiles from veterans standing nearby. An elderly army medic slowly removed a folded handkerchief from his pocket and wiped away tears that had gathered unnoticed. "I have seen courage in many forms," he whispered to the veteran beside him. Kindness takes just as much strength. The master of ceremonies returned to the microphone but did not resume the prepared program. Instead, he looked toward Emily with sincere respect. "Mrs. Carter," he said warmly, "this memorial honors those who quietly served others. It would not be complete without recognizing someone whose service has touched so many lives." Emily hesitated before answering. "Please, I never came here to be recognized. I came because I still remember every face that never made it home, and every dog that waited faithfully beside them." Her words carried no bitterness, only gratitude. The breeze gently lifted the ribbons tied around the memorial wreaths as sunlight slowly broke through the gray clouds for the first time that morning. Warm golden light spread across the white headstones and the carefully trimmed lawn, transforming the quiet cemetery into a place that felt unexpectedly hopeful. Captain Hayes extended his hand. "Then allow us one small opportunity to remember you as well." After a brief pause, Emily accepted. Together, they walked slowly back toward the front of the memorial. The 7 German shepherds calmly turned with her, returning at an easy pace without a single spoken command. As each dog reached its original position beside its handler, perfect formation quietly returned as though it had never been broken. Yet everyone present understood that something had changed forever. The handlers no longer looked only at their remarkable partners. They also looked toward the nurse standing humbly near the memorial, recognizing the unseen hands that had helped shape the confidence, trust, and quiet dignity standing beside them. When the bugler raised the instrument once more, the clear notes drifted across the hillside beneath the brightening sky, and every person gathered there understood that the morning would be remembered not only for honoring the past, but also for finally acknowledging a gentle heart that had spent years helping others find their way home. When the final note of the bugle faded into the cool morning air, no one hurried to leave. The memorial grounds remained wrapped in a peaceful silence unlike any that had existed when the ceremony began. It was no longer the silence of strangers gathered for tradition. It had become the silence of people who had just witnessed an unexpected truth. Emily stood quietly near the memorial wreaths, still holding the bouquet of white lilies that had almost left the ceremony unnoticed. She looked across the rows of white headstones stretching beneath the brightening sky and gently exhaled, as though releasing years of memories she had carried alone. Captain Hayes stepped beside her without speaking for several moments. Finally, he smiled. "There is something I have wanted to show you for a long time." He reached into the inside pocket of his dress coat and carefully unfolded a small collection of photographs whose edges had softened with age. Emily accepted them with both hands. The first photograph showed a much younger version of herself kneeling beside Valor after weeks of rehabilitation. Another captured Harper asleep with her head resting against Emily's knee during a late evening shift. One by one, familiar faces returned from the past. Handlers smiled beside their canine partners. Nurses laughed over coffee cups balanced on medical carts. Sunlight filled hospital windows where hope had quietly returned one patient at a time. Emily laughed softly through tears she no longer tried to hide. "I had forgotten these existed." Captain Hayes nodded. The dogs never forgot. Nearby, several handlers gathered around the 7 German shepherds, sharing stories with families who had become curious after the remarkable events of the morning. One father pointed toward Ranger while explaining to his young daughter that bravery was not measured only by what happened during missions. Sometimes bravery looked like healing afterward. The little girl walked carefully toward Emily with permission from her parents, holding a folded sheet of paper decorated with colored pencil drawings of a German shepherd beneath a bright blue sky. "I made this for the dogs," she said shyly, "but I think you should have it too." Emily accepted the drawing with a grateful smile. "Thank you. I will keep it somewhere special." The child looked up with innocent curiosity. "Did you really remember all of their names?" Emily glanced toward the 7 calm companions resting beside their handlers. "When someone becomes part of your heart," she answered gently, "their name stays with you." The girl smiled, satisfied with the answer, before skipping back toward her family. Around them, conversations spread quietly across the memorial grounds. Veterans exchanged stories that had remained untold for years. Families introduced children to retired handlers. The atmosphere no longer carried only remembrance. It carried connection. Before leaving, Captain Hayes addressed the gathered handlers one final time. Today, our dogs reminded every one of us that loyalty is not measured by rank, applause, or recognition. They remembered the person who cared for them when no one else was watching. Every handler looked toward Emily with quiet respect. She responded only by placing one gentle hand on Valor's neck. The older German shepherd closed his eyes for a brief moment, completely at peace. The sunlight grew warmer as the clouds slowly drifted apart, and across the memorial grounds it seemed as though gratitude itself had found a place to rest among those who understood that the deepest acts of service are often the ones history almost forgets, but faithful hearts never do. Several months later, the memory of that autumn morning had quietly become part of the lives of everyone who had witnessed it. The memorial grounds looked much the same beneath another clear sky, with white headstones stretching across the gentle hills and American flags moving softly in the breeze. Yet something subtle had changed. Near the entrance stood a simple bronze plaque dedicated not only to those who had served in uniform, but also to the caregivers whose quiet devotion had helped both soldiers and military working dogs find the strength to return home. Emily visited only once each year, always carrying the same bouquet of white lilies and wearing the same simple navy coat. She never arrived expecting recognition. She still preferred to stand near the back, allowing families and veterans to have the places of honor they deserved. This time, however, no volunteer asked her to leave. Before the ceremony even began, Captain Hayes greeted her with a warm smile and quietly led her to a seat near the front, where several retired handlers welcomed her like an old friend. Across the ceremonial field, the 7 German shepherds stood once again beside their handlers with the same calm discipline that had always defined them. Their coats gleamed beneath the morning sun, their ears remained proudly alert, and their eyes reflected the quiet confidence that only trust can build over time. As the opening music drifted through the air, Emily watched them with peaceful gratitude rather than surprise. She understood now that loyalty did not belong to the past. It continued living in every shared memory, every gentle touch, and every promise faithfully kept. When the ceremony reached its final salute, the handlers gave a quiet command. The 7 German shepherds held perfect formation, but before leaving the field, each one turned its head toward Emily for a single brief moment. It lasted only a heartbeat, yet everyone who had witnessed the previous year's extraordinary event understood exactly what it meant. No commands had been given. No training manual could have required such a gesture. It was simply recognition offered freely by hearts that remembered kindness. Emily smiled through grateful tears and placed one hand gently over her heart. She did not wave. She did not speak. Some moments become smaller when words are added to them. Around her, families noticed the exchange and quietly smiled without interrupting the silence. A young boy standing beside his grandfather whispered, "Why did they look at her?" The elderly veteran answered softly, "Because gratitude never forgets the people who carried hope when no one else could." The breeze carried those words gently across the hillside as sunlight warmed the rows of white stone. The ceremony ended, the visitors slowly departed, and the memorial grounds returned to peaceful stillness. Emily placed the white lilies beneath the familiar monument, thanked Captain Hayes with a quiet embrace, and walked toward the tree-lined pathway. Behind her, the 7 German shepherds stood watching until she disappeared beyond the oaks, calm and content, as though they knew they would always recognize the gentle soul who had once stood beside them when healing mattered more than applause. Some acts of service are recorded in history, while others are remembered only by grateful hearts. Yet in the end, both leave the world brighter than they found it. And sometimes the truest measure of a life is not how many people know your name, but how many lives quietly become better because you chose to care.